A group of federal advisors met in San Diego this week to come up with a plan to address climate change and its impacts on the U.S.-Mexico border. Paul Ganster is chairman of the Good Neighbor Environmental Board. He joins me to talk about what's under discussion. First, Paul, what is the Good Neighbor Environmental Board?
Good Neighbor Environment Board is a federal advisory panel established in the 1990s as part of the effort to address potential negative impacts on the border of the North American Free Trade Agreement. It meets regularly, usually in a border city and in Washington, and is obligated by law to provide an annual advisory report to the President and to Congress on the state of environmental issues on the border with Mexico.
And how often is its advice heeded by Congress?
Well, sometimes it is by the administration and by Congress because we report to both. But for example, for years we've been advocating binational watershed management along the border, and in a few days the International Boundary and Water Commission, U.S. and Mexican sections, will sign an agreement to begin looking at how to manage the Tijuana River watershed, which is shared between the two countries. There are other areas too where our recommendations have been provoked some action, such as providing surplus first responder gear for Mexican first responders to deal with emergency spills and that sort of thing. And there's a long list going back many years.
So what are some of the environmental issues, the climate change consequences that are affecting people along the U.S.-Mexico border?
Right, we met here in San Diego to sketch out our next report to the President, looking at the effects of climate change in the border region and suggesting appropriate responses. But in terms of actual effects, increasing temperature, both more summer highs, high temperatures, and low temperatures in the evening will also be higher. So that will have a significant impact on residents in the border. More air conditioning requirements, more energy is needed for that. Because of the increasing temperatures along the border, we're seeing new pathogens in the region and new vectors. Dengue, for example, is moving into the border region as a disease that will be resident here.
And why are these issues being discussed right now?
Well, because clearly climate change is emerging as a major issue. Particularly the effects are significant. For example, water shortage along the border is ubiquitous. And in part that is due to increasing temperature, less runoff, faster melting of snowpack, and the water supply in the future will be deteriorating in the Colorado Basin, and San Diego depends on the Colorado Basin for some significant percentage of its water.
And so what form is that water shortage taking on the other side of the border? Are crops not being irrigated properly? What are some of the manifestations of that?
Well, for example, in the Baja California area, Mexicali, Mexico has a yearly allocation of 1.5 million acre-feet, and that's divided for all the urban and agricultural uses. So agriculture in the Mexicali Valley is somewhat stressed. There are shortages, and also there are shortages over the hill here in Tijuana because the Colorado provides almost all of the water for Tijuana.
Now, I understand that the public got to weigh in a little bit on what some of the issues are that they're seeing. What did they say? Well,
most of the input we had today focused on the issue of really watershed management and effects of climate change, more intense storms on the Tijuana River Valley. And so we heard from the public on that, and we'll consider that as we craft our report.
And do you have any idea what your recommendations might be?
Well, we're still having lots of internal discussions because there are really many effects of climate change, and figuring out what the federal government can do to address those and to work with local and state and public groups is somewhat challenging. But the board has a good selection of representatives from the federal agencies, tribal representatives from along the border, NGOs, environmental groups, academics, and the private sector. So over the next few months we'll be putting that together, and we'll be coming up with very specific recommendations. One obvious recommendation is that many of the effects of climate change will be felt on both sides of the border. Some things occurring in Mexico will impact this side of the border and vice versa. And so an obvious recommendation is that U.S. agencies need to work more closely with their counterparts.
Paul Ganster, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you.